Hey everyone, happy holidays. It's going to be a busy one for NASA and Artemis. Jared Isaacman took office as the NASA Administrator on Thursday, December 18th, and the White House immediately issued an executive order they had standing by, which vibes with his private Project Athena document. The document was leaked a couple of months ago before he was nominated for the position again, but after the Senate confirmed him on Wednesday and he took office, the executive order was published. It calls on NASA and the White House to fly the Artemis III mission no later than 2 years from today. In order to land the next people on the moon by 2028 and return them safely to Earth, the lunar lander for Artemis III will need to be orbiting the moon in less than 2 years, and all the design reviews and preparatory demonstrations will need to be completed in much less than 2 years. So the goals are set, but there's no plan yet. The White House has 90 days to come up with one, and we'll be watching to see if that's made public or not. Orion will also need to be on the way to the moon by this time in 2027, or launching on SLS within days in the December 2 years from now. SpaceX may have recently said that Starship HLS won't be ready to fly until September 2028, but it is once again 2027 or bust for Artemis III. The new initiative makes it sound like any alternatives are off the table while HLS races the calendar. Before any of those options are ruled out by the calendar, NASA needs to fly Artemis II as soon as it can, and Exploration Ground Systems is working to have the vehicle and ground systems ready to roll out to the pad in 4 weeks to hit an early February lunar launch opportunity. As I record this, they were planning to conduct the final major pre-rollout test with the 4 Artemis II astronauts this weekend, the countdown demonstration test. And we got a couple of short updates during the week. On Monday, December 15th, the Coalition for Deep Space Exploration held an online media panel about Artemis II with representatives from Amentum, L3Harris, and Lockheed Martin. The Northrop Grumman speaker was unable to attend. I already went over a couple of the technical notes for channel members from Helen Lewin, the RS-25 launch support lead with the Aerojet Rocketdyne group of L3Harris, who will be providing real-time support for the joint integrated team that will oversee the final countdown and launch to orbit on Flight Day 1. Brad McCain, Vice President and Program Manager of the Space Operations Division of Amentum, which is the prime contractor for NASA Exploration Ground Systems launch and recovery operations, provided the first news of the week about the countdown demonstration test. That's the final major pre-rollout test of the flight and ground systems while they are in the vehicle assembly building at the Kennedy Space Center. Mr. McCain said that EGS Integrated Operations and Amentum were targeting the end of the week for the CDDT, which will see that joint integrated team go through a launch day countdown with Orion in a nearly ready-to-launch configuration. The 4 Artemis II astronauts will play a key role in the dry dress rehearsal in the VAB. They will rehearse their launch day timeline down to probably the minute with the closeout crew that will help them get suited in crew quarters, travel with them to the vehicle, help them ingress Orion, and then configure the crew module for simulated launch. The SLS cryogenic stages are not fueled for CDDT, but the test is a high-fidelity rehearsal for Orion. It presumably includes running through the detailed countdown procedures, such as verifying the suit loop and communications connections for each of the crew members in their flight suits and flight seats inside the spacecraft. On launch day, the closeout crew will close the hatch, and the crew cabin will be leak checked, and that would also presumably be rehearsed in detail during the CDDT. As I record this, there's now 4 full weeks of time until mid to late January, where there will be a window of opportunity to roll out from the VAB to Launch Pad 39B to take advantage of the early February launch period 17. That's based on the launch period opening around the end of that first week of February and an 18-day-long pad flow. In the Monday panel, Mr. McCain seemed to me to be pretty matter-of-fact about making a January rollout. He noted a few of the areas of remaining work in the VAB prior to that, after the countdown demonstration test is completed. He spoke about a few final electrical checkout tests and finishing up work inside the interior of the vehicle, the core stage in particular. That includes, as he said, backing out of those volumes, taking out access platforms, and then inspections by quality control. The 2 liquid propellant stages, the core stage and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, are connected by a launch vehicle stage adapter. There are 3 internal volumes that need to be closed out there, which we can see in this cutaway graphic. The graphic is not anatomically correct. Non-disclosure means we see them here in Ken doll form, with all the naughty bits omitted. But that's part of the reason why intricate access platforms are needed, in order to provide places to sit or step or rest while working on these aforementioned private parts without damaging them. The bottom volume is the core stage engine section, above that is the inner tank, and the top SLS-1 is the volume inside the LVSA and the core stage forward skirt. The inside of the LVSA provides access to the ICPS avionics, main propulsion system elements, and the RL-10 engine. Those are suspended above the top of the core stage, where the SLS flight control system computers are situated around the forward skirt and the top of the liquid oxygen tank. There are also 2 internal volumes in the forward skirt of each solid rocket booster. Those 2, along with the core stage inner tank volume, will be the final ones to be vacated before rollout. In theory, the engine section could have been closed out earlier. That was the idea back in the late summer when we last got to talk to EGS Integrated Operations. Relatively late access is also needed to the LVSA to install the ICPS flight batteries and final blanket closeouts inside. That's the dark-colored material on the inner walls. The final work on the vehicle before rollout is a flight termination system end-to-end test inside the inner tank and SRB forward skirts. The inner tank is also where the core stage flight batteries will be installed before that testing. After that test, then final ordnance installations, then closing up those final volumes, and the last work before rolling out to the pad. One interesting thing, maybe just to me, was that Mr. McCain seemed to describe a more formal decision gate on the outcome of the wet dress rehearsal that is planned a few days before the first launch attempt. What's interesting with that is perhaps the timing of that test. Maybe it could or would be done earlier in the pad flow to provide more time to review the results of the WDR. Thursday morning, December 18th, NASA Kennedy Space Center Public Affairs provided updates to questions I had posted a couple of weeks ago in early December. They confirmed that CDDT was targeting Saturday, December 20th. They also provided updates on the final major servicing of Orion commodities, both in the European Service Module consumable storage system. Servicing of the 4 large water tanks was completed during the week, and servicing of the gaseous nitrogen storage tank was being completed. That presumably needs to happen before CDDT itself. I also followed up about the time constraints on usage of the flight termination system, since there was still some uncertainty about final numbers. The response from PAO was, quote, "We continue to work with our range teammates on the exact retest specifications for Artemis II and the initial launch period. Once the numbers are finalized, we will be happy to share those," unquote. So that is still somewhat of an open question going into January ahead of rollout. Those retest specifications will be a factor in the timing of the rollout and the last possible date in early February that a launch could be attempted. Speaking of dates in February, the Canadian Space Agency held media briefings during the week, and February 6 may now be the earliest date a launch could be attempted. The last information we have from NASA was that launch window analysis was still preliminary, so it's not clear if the analysis is converging on that date or not. Stay tuned. Jared Isaacman was finally sworn in as NASA Administrator on Thursday, December 18th. After being tapped for the position over a year ago before the second Trump administration started, this time the Senate was given enough time to confirm his second nomination.
The yeas are 67, the nays are 30. The nomination is confirmed.
Mr. President.
Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, and that the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action for the Isaacson nomination and any nominations confirmed during Wednesday's session of the Senate.
Without objection.
His first was suddenly withdrawn on May 31st, when one could count the hours until a possible confirmation back then. But then he was nominated for a second time by President Trump about 6 weeks ago in early November. Last week, Senate Majority Leader John Thune from South Dakota filed for cloture. I skipped a step in the process last week, saying that cloture was invoked, but that didn't happen until Wednesday the 17th, when the Senate first voted to invoke cloture, and then voted to confirm Mr. Isaacman's nomination. Both votes were 67 to 30. Now that Mr. Isaacman is in office, we will be watching to see what he does during the first several months of his term. There is a lot of uncertainty about what he will do, but to be fair, that's usually the case for incoming administrators with a minimal track record. Now we will see what choices he makes in establishing his track record. One of the obvious political milestones is the next president's budget request. The one for fiscal year 2027 will be submitted to Congress perhaps in the first quarter of next year. Typically, it is submitted in February, but this hasn't been a typical administration, so we'll see. A few hours before those final two votes on the floor of the Senate, the ranking member of the NASA Oversight Committee there, Senator Maria Cantwell of Washington State, spoke about some of the things in front of Mr. Isaacman's administration and why she was going to vote in favor of confirmation.
Fair questions have been raised about Mr. Isaacman's Project Athena strategic plan, which was drafted in May and leaked to the press. I've asked Mr. Isaacman about this plan. In response, he told me the plan was intended to be a proposed approach to collecting data and information from NASA and the space community, serving as a starting point in an in-depth conversation with NASA's management employees on how to ensure NASA remains the world's preeminent aerospace and technology organization. Mr. Isaacman assured me that this plan was not part of a misguided effort to sell off capacities or slash the workforce or have reckless actions like DOGE had proposed earlier. He promised to share with us the results of the study and analysis with Congress and to engage in a dialogue with the committee before doing any implementation. I take Mr. Isaacman at his word, and I do look forward to working with him on these particular promises.
We are already getting an idea about whether the policy lines from this year will be redrawn or stay the same, with the White House returning to positions from the spring. Coincident with Mr. Isaacman taking office, President Trump issued an executive order which stipulates elements of the Project Athena plan that was leaked to the media before Mr. Isaacman was nominated again. The order prioritizes landing Americans on the moon by 2028, likely a reference to Artemis III, and establishing initial elements of a permanent lunar outpost by 2030. In at least one interview with Fox News after taking office on Thursday, Mr. Isaacman made the wording in the order explicit.
So my objective is to ensure that President Trump's vision is achieved, and ideally ahead of schedule. So you talked about a return to the moon. For sure, we want to do that before 2028. In fact, we have a mission, Artemis II, that's set to launch in the very near future. It'll be the first time we send American astronauts around the moon in more than a half century.
So they hope to fly Artemis III before 2028, in other words 2 years from now, and land initial hardware for a lunar base on the surface before the end of the decade. There are obvious implications for Artemis III, and it's also obvious that the executive order aligns with White House plans first published in May. But they have no plan yet, with the deadline in only 2 years. The order directs the president's administration to come up with a plan in 90 days, including a review of the agency's major programs and projects. Obviously, a big question will be whether that submission will be made public or not. If NASA is going to fly Artemis III in 2 years, one implication is that there's no flight crew named for that mission. Another is that there remains no clarity on the current status of the lunar landers. It sounds like NASA will make that lunar lander choice at some point, but when will they know? The lunar lander needs to be orbiting the moon a month or two before the crew is launched, which means there's a good deal less than 2 years to start launching all the infrastructure. How long can NASA wait to make that choice? And if that choice remains to be decided sometime in the long term, and the competition between the SpaceX Starship lander concept and the one from Blue Origin goes on through 2026 or longer, that crew may have to train to fly both of those spacecraft designs and possibly 2 different types of missions. With a much more complicated mission than Artemis II, and the prospect that a lunar lander choice could take a while, it would seem to make sense to give the team preparing for the mission and the crew preparing to fly the mission more time than Artemis II, rather than less. Now that the White House and Mr. Isaacman have reset the goal for Artemis III to 2027 or bust, interest in these long-standing watch items for the mission increases even more. All the programs involved in the mission still have pieces to finish. SLS needs to finish Core Stage 3, Orion needs to finish that spacecraft build, and Axiom Space needs to finish development and certification of its lunar surface spacewalk suits. And before that, Artemis II needs to certify that SLS and Orion are crew-rated for lunar missions. In other news and notes, on Monday, December 15th, Blue Origin posted an update and video on social media for their first Mark I lunar lander. The post says that the BE-7 main engine flight article for the spacecraft completed its acceptance test series. That included 2 almost 5-minute-long vacuum test firings in the Air Force Research Laboratory at Edwards Air Force Base in California. The post says that the engine was headed back to the Space Coast for integration with the first flight Mark I spacecraft. That first Mark I lunar landing mission is planned for sometime in 2026. A very rough outline is that once the fully assembled lander completes its integrated testing in Florida, it will be transported to Houston for thermal vacuum testing at the Johnson Space Center. After returning from Houston to the Cape, it will then be prepared for launch. The Mark I lander has been rumored to play a role in an Artemis III lunar landing concept that Blue is looking at, so there will be even more attention now on the schedule for completing this first mission. On Wednesday, December 17th, the 4th European Service Module Unit, Flight Module 4, arrived at Port Canaveral after water transportation from Bremen, Germany. ESM prime contractor Airbus assembles and tests unit at their production facility in Bremen, and ESM-4 departed inside its shipping container in late November. After arrival, the flight hardware was moved from the ship to Orion prime contractor Lockheed Martin's assembly and test facility inside the Neil Armstrong Operations and Checkout Building. The unit will eventually be mated with the crew module adapter for the Artemis IV spacecraft, and then eventually with the crew module. But the interim milestones and schedules for the Artemis IV Orion are out of date and unknown. Another element for Artemis IV is the SLS exploration upper stage, and on Thursday, December 18th, Boeing posted an update story saying that assembly of the mid-body of the structural test article was complete. The mid-body connects the 2 propellant tanks for the stage and includes the aft adapter, kick ring, and V-struts. The aft adapter was first assembled in the different weld tools at Michoud Assembly Facility in New Orleans East. The barrel was welded in the vertical weld center, and then L-rings were welded to the top and bottom of the barrel in the vertical assembly center. That was then installed in the mid-body assembly tool in the gray box integration area at MAF, along with the kick rings, and then the V-struts were installed and connected between them. Boeing has completed welding of the liquid oxygen tank and assembly of the thrust structure for the test article, and will now be outfitting the mid-body with ground test instrumentation for a structural test campaign at Marshall Space Flight Center, possibly next year. The last structure to be assembled for the STA is the LH-2 tank, with the final 2 major welds of the 2 domes to the barrel in the VAC. The structural elements of the flight article are also lining up for time in the weld tools. The LOX tank domes and rings are welded at Marshall in Huntsville, with the final weld at Michoud. The rest of the elements are welded and bolted together at MAF. NASA was still carrying an official September 2028 target date for Artemis IV, which gives the SLS program and Boeing 2 years to complete the STA and flight articles, run the structural test campaign with the STA at Marshall, and run the Green Run design verification campaign at Stennis Space Center in southern Mississippi. During the week, L3 Harris posted a news release indicating that all 3 of its advanced electric propulsion system 12-kilowatt thrusters for the Gateway power and propulsion element completed their acceptance tests and were delivered to the assembly and test facility for the spacecraft's prime contractor, Lantera Space Systems. I posted a video update on the progress of PPE assembly and test last month based on an interview with Lantera, and since then the 3rd and final L3 Harris solar electric propulsion thruster was delivered, after completing its acceptance test series at the NASA Glenn Research Center in Ohio. Now all 7 of the SEP thrusters are on-site with the spacecraft, which has started integrated testing. PPE will have 3 12-kilowatt AEPS thrusters and 4 6-kilowatt Busek BHT 6000 thrusters installed for its electric propulsion system. That system will perform the majority of the spiral out from Earth orbit to the Gateway orbit, which is a specific near-rectilinear halo orbit. At the end of the week, NASA posted what amounts to historical imagery of Gateway hardware production taken many months ago. Programs that the White House had proposed terminating in May have been restricted from any dialogue with the media or public since then, and just posting imagery of progress seems to have been forbidden until now. This shot of the PPE looks to have been taken more recently, after the equipment panels were installed and the spacecraft was powered up for the first time back in the late summer. It's also a good look at the other end of the spacecraft. This is the aft end or aft deck, once it's fully outfitted, where the solar electric thrusters will be installed. Thanks as always for watching. Like and subscribe if you find these videos informative and want to find out what's going on with Artemis every week. As usual, a big thanks to the members of this YouTube channel who are helping to make it possible to keep doing these videos. I'm posting more videos and making more frequent updates for members during the week if you're interested in joining. If you're willing to make a one-time donation to support what I do, I would really appreciate it. I put a link to my Buy Me a Coffee page in the description. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.